All right. Thank you all so much for coming to our webinar, Behind the Scenes with PJ Library. I am joined with Chris Barish, who is the chair of the PJ Library Book Selection Committee. I'm also joined by Samara Klein, director of PJ Publishing, and Jason Allen, who is a senior creative writer at PJ Library. We are so glad to have all of you with us for this special webinar. I'm just going to quickly take the temperature of our audience and send out a brief poll just to learn a little bit more about who's here today. So you should see on your screen a little poll with 2 questions. Again, for anyone who's just joining us now, welcome to the special webinar, PJ Library, Behind the Scenes with the PJ Library Book Selection Committee. We're just taking a brief poll just to see. If you're not seeing the poll, I'm guessing that it might be because you joined after I launched it, in which case we'll just let you know what the questions were. And if you want to let us know any of the answers, you can put that in the chat. So the questions are you a published author, a pre-published author, an author illustrator, or an illustrator? And are you interested in board books, picture books, graphic novels, or early readers? We just want to get a sense of who's here and what kind of your background is and what kind of books you're interested in reading. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to Jason Allen. And again, if anyone has any technical problems, we're here to help you. You can just throw it in the chat to the panelists. So Jason, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. And first of all, thank you to Emily Brown, who was just speaking to you. She is PJ Library's tireless content associate. And she has not only put this together today, but she's been working on the entire webinar series that you are encouraged and invited to attend. So thank you, Emily, and thank you Tasha Flagg and Rachel Goodman, who will be helping behind the scenes today and monitoring that chat. If you have any questions, they will be happy to answer for you. So I'm really also excited personally for this conversation today because I started out as a proud PJ Library parent subscriber before I joined the organization. But when I did join, I was so thrilled and impressed to see that the people behind the scenes are exactly as caring and expert and meticulous in doing what they do as you would want someone to be who is creating a program for your child. So that's why I'm very proud to introduce 2 of those people here today. For 10 years, Chris Barish has been the chair of PJ Library's Book Selection Committee. Prior to that, she taught for many years and was a principal in Jewish day schools. She lives in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, which I'm told is just a few miles and one easy segue from our co-panelist, the wonderful Samara Klein. Samara has been working at PJ Library for 8.5 years. She is the director of PJ Publishing, which is PJ Library's in-house book publishing imprint, which we will learn more about today. And prior to PJ, Samara worked in trade book publishing. So thank you both for being here and doing this today. I think it's really important because, as everybody knows, the mission of PJ Library is based in great books. So what better way to get more great books than by telling authors exactly how our process works so that they can get them to us. So let's start with Chris, if you wouldn't mind, please telling us a bit about the Book Selection Committee. Who is the Book Selection Committee? What is the Book Selection Committee? Oh, and you're still on mute. It's bound to happen.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
So the Book Selection Committee of PJ Library is made up of 8 members currently from a wide variety of backgrounds and both professionally and personally. The basic job of the Book Selection Committee is to choose, for many years I've been saying 88 books each year, 11 books each month, 11 months each year, but it's actually 99 books each year now, because last September we launched a new age group. Until that time, PJ Library's youngest age group spanned from 6 months up to 2 years. And we recognized for some time that that was not the optimal way of dealing with children with that wide range of ages. And so last September, we launched an age 0 for children from birth up to age 1. So now we have 9 age groups and 99 titles. So as I said, the task of the book selection committee is to come up with the best possible titles for each of those categories. And we do that by considering manuscripts that come to us. We right now are receiving, I'd say, an average of between 80 and 100 manuscripts a month, which come from authors, agents, publishers, and occasionally from a friend. We do it by encouraging writers through our connections with them and their agents, if they have one, to create more manuscripts and books for us. We need to be aware of what's happening in the publishing world and what books are in the pipeline of various publishers. And then my job is to create a list each month for the committee, from which we choose one book for each age group.
Thank you so much. And Samara, would you please tell us about PJ Publishing? What is PJ Publishing, and maybe what makes it different, if it is different, from other publishing houses?
Yes, I'd be happy to. First, I'll just say a few stats about PJ Publishing before I get into a little bit of how it works, and that's really where the similarities and differences crop up. PJ Publishing was established 6 years ago, and we have published 30 titles, published and distributed 30 titles, and there are another currently 12 in process. I am going to now just pop a link in the chat here, which if you click on will bring you to PJ Publishing's catalog on the PJ Library website. And there you can see all the books that we've published and distributed to date. The reason PJ Publishing was created was, well, as we know from Chris, we need 99 unique titles each year. It's a lot of books. So we are always in need of high quality Jewish children's literature, and we are always devising new ways to acquire it and share it with subscribers. So this was one of the reasons that PJ Publishing was created. And also we were seeing some maybe holes in the books being published by trade publishers that we wanted to fill. Or so for example, less so 6 years ago when PJ Publishing began, or more so 6 years ago when PJ Publishing began, there was not a lot, we weren't seeing a lot of diversity in Jewish children's books. And so PJ Publishing allowed us to create, for example, I mean, there are many, but this is a lovely book called Fridays Are Special, in which there's a multiracial child celebrating Shabbat with his family. Another area that we were seeing, not seeing more of what we wanted, was more different formats, playing around with format to allow parents and kids to engage with the books on an almost physical level too. So PJ Publishing gave us the opportunity to create a book such as Donde está Shmata, which has lift the flaps throughout, where the child searches for her missing beloved Shmata blanket. This is a book with just 2 simple die cuts. It's called Purim Masquerade, becomes a mask book that children can wear and become all the characters in the story of Purim. And this is actually a little bit of a preview title. This will be coming to PJ Library subscribers Hanukkah this year. And this is a book with what I like to call lots of bells and whistles. Each page offers a different interaction, and including the last page, which pops up. So PJ Publishing also offered us a way to illustrate stories that wanted to be illustrated. For example, this book, Onions and Garlic, was a podcast. Circle Round is a wonderful podcast, and this is a graphic novel created from a Jewish folktale that they told on that podcast. So the way that PJ Publishing works is that a manuscript will come through the book selection committee. If it is a manuscript that the members of the committee decide that they would like to see as a book distributed by PJ Library, then PJ Publishing may come in and make an offer. I'll speak a little bit more to the details of that later. We execute an agreement. We work with the author on edits, on the pagination and illustration directives of the book. And then we find an illustrator. An illustrator, usually the process is that they'll go through first pass sketches, second pass, first pass color art, and final art. And then it moves on to design. I'll stop here to say that I think in some trade houses, and this is not the case overall, that oftentimes when an author has a manuscript accepted, their work on the manuscript after some edits is maybe over until the book comes out, and then the book's life out in the world begins. But at PJ Publishing, we like to work very closely with authors on reviewing with them how we will see the illustrations. Will it be a full bleed illustration? Will it be a spot art illustration? Where will the page turn be? We also like to talk with them about the illustrators whom we would like to approach for the project. Do they too see this as an illustrator that really makes their manuscript sing? Well, and then we move on to the design part, which is very customary with a trade house, except of course we have PJ Library specifications and customizations that come into play. And then it moves on to production and is printed. Generally, depending on the age group and the month, numbers differ, but usually 20 to 30,000 copies of a book is printed. That's another difference with the trade house. It's a very large print run. So there's a lot of people reading books that are selected by PJ Library. And then the book is distributed to PJ Library subscribers. This is perhaps the real difference between a trade house. In a trade house, the marketing team would get ready, the sales team would go out and sell the book, the publicists would make sure that those books go off the shelves. We then distribute to our 20 to 30,000 subscribers in that age group. But we have recently started making PJ Publishing books available for sale on PJ Library's Amazon storefront. So that is also a new component. While smaller than a trade house, it is we are making books commercially available too.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, that was a great intro, and we will be coming back to Samara more for information about the timeline of how that all works, and again, how to get our books to PJ Publishing. And I wanted to tell Chris and Samara now the results of the first part of the survey, because as we answer the questions, it's good for you to know who we're speaking to. So the audience today replied that 53% of them are published authors and 39% are pre-published authors, with 14% identifying as author illustrators and 4% identifying as illustrators. So that's good to know. And also that 86% of you watching today, or at least 86% who got the poll popped up on your screen, say that you're interested in creating picture books. So that's our audience. That works out great. So Chris, if you could tell us the process for submitting, including, since we have a good split of published and pre-published authors, who is welcome to submit? Is it open for anybody? Can a new unpublished, unrepresented author get their break from PJ Library? And what is the submission process?
Okay. So we'll split this up into sections. First of all, the process for submitting. So all of our submissions come through Submittable, and I'm sure they'll be happy to put the link up for those people to be able to see. A lot of the information that we're sharing with you today is also available on the PJ Library website. There's an author's hub where you can see a lot of this information in print. So as I said, it all comes through Submittable. I'm told it's a fairly easy process. Most people are able to handle it well. Once a manuscript has been submitted, the submitter will receive an acknowledgement of it. So they know that it's in the pipeline, that it has been received and will be viewed by the committee. Once that is done, there's an initial reading to make sure that there's nothing about the book or the manuscript that would keep it from being considered as a PJ Library book. For example, if the content is too mature, or if there's no Jewish content to it at all, or if it has significant Holocaust content, something like that. Once that's been determined, the phone committee, which is made up partially of members of the full book selection committee, but also several contractors, consultants who work with us strictly to read and comment on manuscripts. So the manuscript will go to them. They will have time to read, consider, fill out a rubric, and then once a week that committee meets by phone, and they discuss a number of manuscripts. Once that discussion has taken place, if there's a clear decision about the manuscript, and I can talk a little bit about what those decisions might be, it's either a firm yes, a firm no, or a maybe. Once that decision has been reached, then the submitter is notified, again through Submittable, the status of their submission. Who can submit? Authors, agents, publishers, anyone who has a manuscript that they would like us to consider and that they feel is appropriate for PJ is welcome to consider. The next part of your question, I think, was, does a person who has not yet been published have a chance? The answer is absolutely. First of all, let me say that the submissions that are received and that are considered by the phone committee and then perhaps later by the full committee are read and considered blind. So the committee does not know whose manuscripts are being considered. I will say that in my role, I do sometimes see who the submitter is. And I will say that it's always a bit of a thrill to see the name of an established, well-published author. I know I have a pretty good chance of seeing something that's going to be of interest, but it's an equal but different kind of thrill to accept a manuscript and then see that it's a name I don't recognize. And I know that the entire committee feels that way too, for the reason that here's some fresh perspective, a new voice, and who knows what they might be able to accomplish down the road once they really get started. So we're always happy to see that. I do also want to say one thing about the members of the committee in terms of their reading of manuscripts, and that is the committee takes this very seriously. And we recognize that it's not an easy task to not only to create a manuscript, but to put oneself out there and share it with others and open oneself up to critique or declination. And so we really respect that. And it is not uncommon for committee members to say to me, we didn't take that manuscript, but please let that author know to keep trying, to keep working at it, to submit to us again. We want to see more work by this person. And when they say that to me, they don't even know who it is. They just know that they want to encourage people to keep writing. So.
Chris, will you ever tell an author that it is of interest but needs revisions, or sending it back to the author for changes? And what should they do? What would they do in that case?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. As I said, there are three ways that it can go for a submission. One is not all that common, which is to say, this is ready to go to the publisher. We definitely want it. We know it will be a great fit for PJ Library. At the other end of that spectrum is this manuscript might have wonderful qualities, but for any number of reasons, it's not a good fit for PJ Library. And so we would decline that manuscript. I do want to just mention in terms of that, that PJ Library, though very important to us, is not the only game in town. And so a manuscript, a book that might not fit our needs is not necessarily one that won't get published and be wildly successful. We would like that to happen. So one should not take a no from PJ Library to be the end of the story, so to speak. And so then we have that middle group of the maybes. The committee sees qualities in the manuscript, but it's not quite there. It doesn't quite fit what we need. It's not quite as strong as we would like it to be. In which case, I would be in touch with the submitter. Most often this would be the author, and offer to share feedback. And if the author wishes to make changes based on that feedback, then generally what would happen is I would ask them to send it directly to me a second time. And then based on the changes that they've made, they would be invited to resubmit for consideration again by the committee. And that's the only way we take resubmissions, is if they are requested or invited.
Great, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So that we have a lot of questions to get through, more than we could possibly get through in the hour. So I really want to prioritize the questions that you couldn't find out by shooting a quick email or looking on our website, factual questions. I would like to get the more insight-based questions that only live inside the brains of the people who are making these decisions, because it's your advice, I think, that's going to help a writer get us the best possible manuscript. They can figure out the process of getting it to us by other means. So Samara, if you could talk about illustrations. If I'm an author, I have a manuscript, I'm very proud of the text that I've written. Should I spend some energy trying to find an illustrator or a friend who can do some mock-ups? Would that give me a leg up to submit my manuscript with illustrations, or is it a limitation, or does it depend?
If you are not an author illustrator, if you are an author, don't worry about it. In fact, really don't worry about it. That's what PJ, if your manuscript is accepted, that is what PJ Publishing is here for. If it's accepted by another publishing house, that they will work with you on finding the right illustrator, and they will also have some ideas of what type of illustration fits that story well. That said, I would encourage authors to always think about illustrations as they're writing, and especially as they're rewriting, perhaps, to think about where they will fall, what will be represented perhaps by an illustration that isn't represented by words. And to that end, sometimes it's very appropriate to include an illustration directive set off in parentheses or italics to say perhaps there's a spread where there's no words, but two people are waving goodbye, and we know that that's what's happening in scene. So certainly include that if your vision of the illustration will be telling some of the story. That said, an overabundance of illustration directives can also sometimes make a manuscript difficult to read. So the really necessary parts in there are great, but the pattern of the wallpaper is not. And also in keeping with that, if the book that you're writing has a concept behind it, and you are not an illustrator who is also executing that portion of it, to explain that concept as best you can. And perhaps that's in a rough sketch, and that's fine. But if you're not an author illustrator, send us your manuscript, and if it's accepted, it will find the illustrator.
Great. I want to jump a little bit to, we had planned for each of our panelists to show you a book that they've decided to bring to the webinar today. And I want to make clear, we are not using the word favorite. That would be way too unfair to ask them to choose one favorite from among the catalog. Instead, they're going to be showing you one book that they've selected that they think demonstrates something that has been done really well that's worth showing to you, so you can see why we like it so much. So Chris, do you want to show us the book that you have brought today? I think Emily's going to put it on the screen for us while you
Absolutely. I think it's probably telling that I could not find in my home a copy of the book. So thank you, Emily, for putting up the cover of this book. Again, as Jason said, these are examples of books that we find are special in some way, that really stand out to us. Our committee often sees manuscripts and books that do something particularly well. Maybe the author has a certain way with dialogue, or their word choice is exceptional, or their characters are especially well developed, or their writing is particularly lyrical. And it's not uncommon for us to see more than one of those fine aspects in a book. Sometimes, though, everything just seems to click. And for me, one such book of a number is The Forever Garden, written by Laurel Snyder, illustrated by Samantha Cotterill, and published by Schwartz and Wade. This is an intergenerational story of two neighbors, one a mature woman, the other a little girl. The two bond over the adult, her name is Honey, over her garden, with many lessons learned. I find something new every time I read the book. I opened it up just a couple of days ago and saw something in the illustrations that I had never noticed before. First, though one does not need to know this in order to enjoy the book, the story is based on Honey the Circle Maker. In this case, it's a book that discusses in a very child-friendly way the idea, the very Jewish idea, that one it's best for one not to think only of him or herself, but to think about the future and those who come after. Because there are always going to be people who need carrots or carobs, whatever, to eat. And planting for the future is a very good thing. The story is intergenerational, it's multicultural, it's not a Shabbat story, but it has subtle Shabbat features. For example, the Friday night dinner table has braided, maybe one, maybe two, braided challah. The story contains loss. In that Honey packs up, sells her home, and moves away in order to care for her ill mother. And it has the aftermath of loss and how the little girl deals with the loss of her neighbor. The language is very accessible, but it has depth. For example, in that same scene where the dinner table is set on Friday night, and describing that table and perhaps the people around it. The text says, "Nothing matches, but everything fits." And I just think that's such a beautiful telling phrase. Nothing matches, but everything fits. So all of this in a picture book based on a backyard garden. And as Laurel Snyder says in her author's note, people are gardens too.
Thank you so much, Samara. I am told that you have a physical copy. Actually, let me ask Chris, when you say that it's telling that you don't have a copy in your home, do we take that to mean that every time you get a copy, you quickly find someone to give it away to as a gift?
That would be it.
Just wanted to make sure that's what you're saying. Okay, great. Samara, what have you brought to show the class today?
This is a book called Sign Language Shabbat, and it's photographs of children. The children are students at the American School for the Deaf, and they teach the signs associated with a Shabbat celebration that a very young child would have. Photography books are wonderful for little ones because they love to look at faces and they love to emulate other kids, especially, a little bit older kids. And I love that they're learning sign language from these children who know it well and who learn it every day. And then this, I just can clearly imagine many families at home interacting so much with this book, learning the signs, the parents and children together. I think the creation of this book was a joy. And so I see that every time I see this book as well. There were many contributors to it, even though it's just a board book with not so many spreads, but the students at the American School for the Deaf, the administration, two authors who are very close friends, a photo illustrator whose work is in photographing children, which she calls photo illustrations for picture books, and a wonderful illustrator whom we have worked with on other books as well. So it was a lot of people who came together to create this wonderful book. And now I know it goes out into the world and is utilized so much in homes. So that's why I selected that one.
And I can personally confirm from direct experience that the children do enjoy interacting with it. My kids definitely spent plenty of time on each page showing each other the signs and staring at the pictures. So thank you both for those instructional examples of great PJ Library books. Chris, you mentioned that one of the things that happens in the gatekeeping process as manuscripts comes in is to make sure that they meet some basic criteria. And one of those is that it contains some Jewish content, which brings up the question, what exactly does PJ Library consider that to mean? What is Jewish content? And what about a family who says, but my child received a copy of A Sick Day for Amos McGee, which has no overtly Jewish content in it. So what's an author to do with a manuscript that they feel is of that caliber, even if it doesn't have overtly Jewish content? What is Jewish content?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. I don't have a definitive answer. It's a question that we struggle with, contemplate, discuss on a regular basis in the book selection committee. And we never really come up with one definite description. What I can say in terms of the books that PJ Library uses is that a Jewish book is not a book that has a character with what one might consider a typically Jewish name. It's not a book that merely mentions kind of offhand a Jewish holiday. Jewish content can take many forms. It could be a story based on a very Jewish activity, such as Jewish summer camp. It could have to do with holiday observances, life cycle events. It could be Jewish folktale, could be stories about Israel and life there. They could include stories from the Chumash or Midrash, or stories based on the Talmud. There could be so many ways of including Jewish content. Now, in terms of those books like A Sick Day for Amos McGee, yes, we do use such books on occasion, sparingly. We use these secular books that do not have overtly Jewish content when we feel that it's a book of exceptional quality in the trade, and we can make very strong, easy connections to, for example, Jewish values. And we find that our audience responds very well to these, and often we're able to make such fine connections for people. And of course, as I said, the quality needs to be exceptional in those, and we use them sparingly. While we do use those books on occasion, they are not materials that we would take as submissions. So we would only use such a book if it was already a published title.
Great, thank you. And Samara, one question we get constantly all the time: what are you looking for? What topics is PJ Library and PJ Publishing in need of most? Topics and or age groups? Specifically, I'll tell you that some of the people who wrote in before today's webinar to ask, they wanted to know specifically, are we looking for historical fiction, humor, poetry? Would we accept collections of essays? What are we looking for? What do we need more of?
Okay, I'm going to, I think first and foremost, what we need is really spelled out on the website in bullets. So I'm going to drop that into the link and not reread it for everyone, but just highly encourage everyone to read it and read it again. So that's, oh, and it's, which drop down is that? Well, that's all right. It's, in addition to what's written there, and speaking to the age groups, we are always in need of board books for the youngest ages. For whatever reasons, I have my theories, but for whatever reasons, there is not as much being produced out there. They, are often 7 spreads long, but are deceptively simple, I think, to distill the right words and to have it to be, extremely visually stimulating. And as Chris had mentioned, this need has grown even more because now we have a new younger age group. So our need in that area is big. And I also, really encourage people to explore more concept-based books too, to think about the format of the book and how it can be interacted with. I think at that young age in the board book format can be so successful. On the other end of the PJ Library age group, we're also looking for early readers. Once PJ Library subscribers graduate from the program, they can move on to PJ Our Way. And we really love to populate the last 2 years of the program with kind of the beginning of reading on your own, and early readers are again, we don't see as much of, so that's another area. You mentioned historical fiction, Jason, is that true? Yes, yeah. That's always an area of interest. I mean, there's really not an area of interest in so many ways. I will say, when a book is good, it is good. But in the area of historical fiction, I would say also that also well-researched, as readers, we really want to feel confident that the author knows the time and place that the story that they're writing takes place in. And also, I think to explore perhaps some lesser known people, events, places. In the historical fiction realm, I haven't counted, but I'd say probably the majority of the stories are a story from the shtetl to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And it's an incredible story, and it's still being told beautifully in many ways, but it's also one that we do see more of, whereas there are other stories we'd love to learn about too. Humor, yes, but boy, it's hard to do. And if you can do it well, please, you know, it's so exciting to read a funny manuscript. Poetry, I will say, we, in my current memory, we do not have any poetry on the list. I think this is not something that we don't do. It's just that we haven't found the right collection of poems that could be a PJ Library book. And I would say the same for essays. Essays feels a little bit, to me, more in the PJ our way, you know, age group realm. But again, I would say it's, while we haven't, we've done compilations of folktales and whatnot. It's that we haven't found the right one.
Okay, great. Thank you. And for anybody who didn't know, PJ Our Way is our program for older readers, and they have an entirely unique process and book selection team. Emily will, at the end of this webinar, about the behind the scenes webinar they'll be hosting next month. So please look out for that. Chris, Samara raises a question that actually reminds me of the list that you have very kindly put together for authors. Because Samara said, if it's good, it's good. So that brings to mind, of course, people want to know, what does PJ Library need? And of course, we want to put out the call if we have an area that we feel like we want to get more from. But when it comes down to it, what can you say about the balance between trying to write what we need and what we ask for versus the first item on your helpful list, which, if Emily could bring up the list, it's, I want to use your words, which you said so well: write what you know and write what you're excited to share. Passion for your story is a great first step in making it engaging and authentic. Can you talk about that balance? Oh, you're still on mute, Chris. Stuck on mute. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're back.
Good. Jason, I have to say, I lost you completely.
Oh, no.
My screen, it's back now, but I didn't hear the question. Could you please?
No problem. I was telling everyone about this great list that you have put together, which is the insight that I was talking about that we wanted to get from you and from the committee. This list is going to be made available for you, so look for it in the links. But the first item on the list, Chris, is something that reminds me of what Samara was saying. She was telling us the categories and age groups that we have specific needs, and we put out the call and said, please, if you have something like this, we're looking for it. But at the same time, the first item on your list stresses to write what you know and write what you're excited to share. So there is a balance there. And as Samara said, when it's good, and we want to read good manuscripts. Is there anything more you would want to say about that balance between finding out what we need or writing your story?
Well, what I would say about that is that, you know, I sometimes get questions. This might be more from publishers than from authors. They'll contact me and they'll say, I have a Jewish manuscript, but I don't really think it's for you. I think it's probably something that's either too old for you, or it goes down a path that I haven't seen you go down before, or for whatever reason. And I always say to these people, these questioners, send it to me anyway. You know, we would so much rather see something that might not work for us than to miss something that can. You know, there's a lot of discussion these days and well-placed questioning about own voices and shared experiences, etc. And those are important. You know, we need to hear stories from people who live them, from people who are connected to them in very real ways. But there's a lot of room in children's literature for all kinds of stories. And I would not ever want to say to someone, we wouldn't be interested in that. We don't want to do this. Try something new. If you have the inspiration and want to put the effort into it, try something different. We'll look at it. It might not work for PJ. It might not work for anyone, but it could be something new and fresh and wonderful. So my suggestion to authors is don't be afraid.
Great. And again, this list, it goes on even longer than it's showing on the screen, but it is a valuable list that will immensely give you a leg, I think, in submitting something that you can feel confident meets the criteria that PJ Library is looking for, and just hopefully will raise the quality of your writing. And so, Chris, I'm going to stay with you for a moment because in what I think might be our last time of this webinar, I want to hear from both of you. But Chris's end begin on the submission side. Can you tell us what is the timetable for the time from the moment I submit a manuscript to you? What's the timeline that I could expect for it to go through the process? And if you could mention at some point in that process the author incentive and what it is.
Okay, so immediately after submitting a manuscript, the submitter will receive an acknowledgement. So you know it's been received, you know we've gotten it, it's going to be dealt with. There are several steps to the process after that acknowledgement and receipt of the manuscript. Generally, right now, it can take around 3 months, around 12 or a little more weeks for the committee to receive the manuscript, read it, consider it, make their comments about it, and discuss it. Once that happens, then the submitter will be contacted again. If it's a yes, great, I will be in touch. We'll talk about next steps. If it's a no, the submitter will receive a declination saying it doesn't work for us, but hopefully encourage them to continue their work and writing and submissions. And if it's a maybe, if it's in that category where we think it has promise, but it's not quite where we would want it to be in order to move forward with it, then the submitter will receive notification from me that I'd be happy to provide some feedback if they wish for it. And then I would have a conversation with that person and decide where to go from there. And the second part of your question was about the Author Incentive Award. The Author Incentive Award continues as it has. Again, you can read a lot about it on the website. These are awards that are truly awards. They are not meant to replace the monies that one receives from the publisher. This is to thank the author for writing Jewishly, to congratulate them on having their manuscript/book accepted by the committee, and to encourage them to continue to do that. There are various awards based on whether it's text only, whether it's from an author illustrator, and what formatting the book is in, whether it's board book, picture book, graphic novel, etc. And then I will just mention that PJ Our Way has a similar, but in some ways different set of criteria and award amounts.
And if the committee selects a manuscript and that author receives the Author Incentive Award, that doesn't necessarily mean that that manuscript is going to then be published either by PJ Publishing or another house.
It is almost always the case in our experience that that's the way it goes. The manuscript will become a book and it will be used by PJ Library. However, The award is not dependent on that. The award is for the author at that point in the process. And our hope, our expectation is that it will become a book. We will use it. It will be wildly successful, etc. But it is given for the reasons that I stated a minute ago and is not dependent at all on its eventual publication.
Okay, thank you. And so Samara, PJ Publishing then sees every book, every manuscript that is selected by the committee, and some, but not all of them, would be selected by PJ Publishing to make an offer, as you explained earlier. So if you could please now take over the process from there and give us the timeline and the process. What happens to a manuscript if you've made an offer and the author has accepted it? What is that timeline? And if you would also mention the money as well, how much could you expect to get paid for a book that gets published?
Well, the timeline, you know, if then PJ Publishing acquires said manuscript, it really has everything to do with the illustrator. So that is an unknown. The illustrator whom we may want so badly for this particular story may be booked up for a year out, and they may be so wonderful that we will wait a year. So it's very hard to give, you know, a firm X amount of months timeline, because it really has to do with the illustrator, and some work quite quickly and some techniques are very involved, and so all of that can play a role. But let's say that that an illustrator was ready to roll when we signed them up, and let's say they illustrated the book in a 6-month period, which all could happen. Then after those illustrations, we would go through the design process, which is, you know, generally about a month of different passes of design, and then off to production, off to the printer, where proofs are made and dummies and the printing process, binding, and then shipping to America. All of that is about a 4-month process. The books then are in the warehouse being sorted and determining their location. Some then goes overseas to be distributed in overseas programs. So for about 2 months, they await their turn, and then they are sent out to families. So if we were to take 6 months, you know, if the illustrator could begin right away and it was took them 6 months, it's about a year after, little over a year, that a book would be in the hands of PJ Library subscribers.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, and in addition, while you're telling us how much one could expect to get paid for a published book, one of the attendees is also asking if you could tell us, as the publisher, like other publishers, do you submit PJ Publishing books to professional reviewers, make them available for conferences, and or enter them for awards?
Okay, well, I'll speak to that first. This part is new for us, began this year, selling the books on the PJ Library Amazon storefront. We are beginning doing more kind of traditional marketing publicity things, such as, you know, submitting to publishers' weeklies, preview. We will submit to some awards that, you know, books are particularly suited for. That said, because our first priority is to create wonderful Jewish children's books for the PJ Library subscribers, we're not a traditional, robust trade house where our mission is to sell. So we don't then have a publicity department and a marketing department and a sales department. So whereas we are entering that world, it is different, or it's not as large, I guess. In terms of payment, well, traditionally authors receive an advance on royalties, And the royalties are calculated as a percentage of the sale price of the book. But PJ Library has no retail price on which to base such a royalty. And so instead we offer a flat fee, and that flat fee differs depending on the books. If it's a board book, a picture book, a longer graphic novel type book, and also if the author is author illustrator. So there are different fees in those different areas. I will say that they are very competitive with trade publishing houses advances. And then in addition, as we mentioned, we're making books available through Amazon. And for these books, the author is given it is 50 cents per book that is shipped to Amazon. So it's again slightly different structure. The payment happens in the shipping off of the book, not in the sale of the book, but a bit more similar to a traditional royalty structure in that way.
Great. Thank you so much. This was a tremendous amount of information and barely the tip of the iceberg of your insight to Chris Barish and Samara Klein. I want to thank you both so much for sharing all of this, as well as for putting together all of the resources that Emily is going, and Tasha and Rachel as well, are going to make sure to get out to all of our attendees, both the live attendees and anyone watching this as a recording. So thank you, everybody. And Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jason. I just threw in the chat a link to the other webinars upcoming. We're going to be having in June a behind the scenes with the PJ Our Way Book Selection Committee. So for folks who maybe also write for a little bit of an older age group, please join us for that or let your friends know. And then in July, we're going to be doing a webinar about Midrash as inspiration for Jewish children's books. So that'll be really exciting. So you can find the links to register in the chat there. And again, almost all of your questions, you might be able to find information on our website. pjlibrary.org/manuscripts is a great resource that includes information about submissions, author incentive awards, our framework link, and much, much more. I want to thank Chris, Samara, and Jason so much for being part of this webinar today. And thank you all so much for attending. It really means a lot to get to share this space and community with you. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.